In the quiet rural landscapes of Arkansas, far from the noise of major cities and the fast pace of modern American life, a story began that would eventually capture the attention of millions around the world. It did not begin with fame, wealth, or ambition for television. It began with a belief system, a marriage, and a vision of family that was far outside the norm of contemporary society. Jim Bob Duggar and Michelle Duggar were a young couple driven by deeply conservative Christian convictions. From the very beginning of their marriage, they believed that children were not something to be limited or controlled, but something to be embraced fully as a blessing from God. In a time when most American families were planning small households, focusing on careers, and carefully managing finances, the Duggars made a different decision. They chose openness to life without restriction. What started as a normal family gradually expanded in a way that few could imagine. One child became two became four, and over time, the number continued to grow until it reached 19 children. Each child's name began with the letter J, a detail that eventually became symbolic of the family's identity. But behind that detail was something far more complex. A household built on structure, discipline, and a highly organized system of living that was necessary simply to function on such a large scale. Inside the home, life was not chaotic in the way outsiders might assume. Instead, it was structured almost like a small institution. Daily routines were carefully planned. Responsibilities were divided among children. Older siblings often helped care for younger ones, not as a burden, but as part of the family system. Homeschooling replaced traditional education, and learning took place inside the home under the supervision of the parents. The family's worldview was shaped by conservative evangelical Christianity, particularly influenced by teachings associated with the Institute in Basic Life Principles, an organization that emphasized strict moral behavior, obedience within family structure, and clearly defined gender roles. In this belief system, family hierarchy was important. Fathers were seen as spiritual leaders, mothers as caretakers and nurturers, and children as individuals who were expected to respect authority and follow guidance. As the family continued to grow, their lifestyle remained consistent. They lived in a way that emphasized modesty, discipline, and faith-based decision-making. Entertainment was limited, media exposure was controlled, and social interactions were often guided by religious principles. To them, this was not extreme. It was intentional living shaped by conviction. For many years, the Duggar family lived quietly within their community. They were known locally, but not nationally. That changed when media producers discovered their story. At first, it was curiosity. A family with so many children was unusual, and unusual stories attract attention. What would daily life look like? How would such a household function financially, emotionally, and practically? Documentary crews began filming segments of their lives. What they found was a system that, while unconventional, was highly organized. The home was not chaotic, it was structured. Meals, chores, schooling, and family routines all operated within a defined rhythm. The children were active participants in maintaining the household. The parents provided leadership, but the system depended on collective cooperation. The public reaction was immediate. When audiences were introduced to the Duggar family, they were divided. Some saw inspiration. They admired the discipline, the unity, and the faith-driven structure. Others saw something more complicated. They questioned whether such a system allowed enough individuality for each child, whether the structure was too rigid, and whether the expectations placed on children were too strict. Despite the debate, interest continued to grow. What began as documentary appearances evolved into a full television series titled 19 Kids and Counting. With this shift, the Duggar family moved from private life into public visibility. Their daily routines, family milestones, and personal moments became part of a televised narrative watched by millions. As the show gained popularity, the family gradually became public figures. Births were shared with audiences. Weddings became televised events. Family gatherings, vacations, and milestones were no longer private experiences but public content. The Duggars maintained that they were not pursuing fame, but rather sharing their way of life. However, the reality was that their lives were now deeply intertwined with media attention. At the center of their public image remained Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, guiding the family through a structured belief system that shaped every major decision. Their parenting style emphasized discipline, obedience, and faith-based living. Courtship replaced dating, meaning that relationships were not casual or private but intentional and often supervised by family members. In this system, young adults did not simply choose relationships independently. Instead, courtship involved parental involvement, religious alignment, and a structured path toward marriage. Physical boundaries were strict, emotional progression was cautious, and relationships were expected to develop within clear moral frameworks. To supporters, this approach protected young people from modern relational instability. To critics, it raised concerns about autonomy and emotional freedom. As the television series continued, older Duggar children began entering adulthood, and their courtships became public storylines. Engagements, weddings, and family milestones were broadcast to millions of viewers. The family's private life was now fully public, and each new development added to their cultural visibility. However, as their fame increased, so did scrutiny. A system that once existed privately was now being examined publicly. Observers began to analyze not only what was shown on television, but also what might exist behind the scenes. The more visible the family became, the more questions were asked about structure, control, and internal dynamics. During this period, attention began to focus on Josh Duggar, the eldest son. Initially presented as a responsible figure within the family, his role in the household was significant due to his position as the firstborn in such a large family. However, over time, serious revelations emerged regarding his past behavior as a teenager. When these issues eventually became public, they created widespread shock and controversy. The public response was intense. Questions arose about accountability, internal handling, and transparency. The image of the family as a structured and disciplined household was suddenly challenged. The television program faced significant backlash, and the family's public reputation began to shift. In the following years, the show was rebranded into Counting On, focusing more on the adult children rather than the entire family. But the shift did not remove the shadow of controversy. The Duggar name remained tied to public debate and media scrutiny. Eventually, further legal issues involving Josh Duggar emerged, leading to criminal charges and a federal conviction. This marked a turning point in the family's public story. The legal outcome brought the Duggar family back into global attention, but under dramatically different circumstances than before. What had once been a story of large family fascination had now become a narrative involving legal consequences, public reflection, and media reassessment. As a result, television production surrounding the family ended completely. Their presence in mainstream media disappeared. Sponsorships and network partnerships were discontinued. The era of televised Duggar family life came to a close. In the aftermath, the family retreated from public visibility. Some members chose to live private lives, while others maintained selective public engagement through social media. Over time, the family became less of a televised phenomenon and more of a subject of cultural discussion and analysis. Despite the end of their television era, the Duggar family story continued to circulate in public discourse. Documentaries, commentary videos, and online discussions kept their narrative alive. Their story became more than entertainment, it became a case study in how belief systems, media exposure, and family structure interact in the modern world. At its core, the Duggar story is not just about one family. It reflects larger questions about how people choose to live, how faith shapes decisions, and what happens when private life becomes public property. It also raises questions about the cost of visibility, especially when deeply personal systems of belief are placed under global observation. Today, the Duggar family exists in a very different form than they once did. No longer the center of a television franchise, they live more privately, with individual members pursuing separate paths. Some remain closely connected to their original belief system, while others have redefined their personal identities outside of it. The structure that once defined their public image has evolved into something more fragmented and individual. What remains is a story that continues to be discussed long after the cameras stopped rolling. A story that began with faith and family growth, expanded into national fame, and eventually transformed into controversy and reflection. It is a story about structure and visibility, about belief and consequence, and about how quickly a private life can become a public narrative that the world watches unfold. And even now, years later, the Duggar family remains part of a larger cultural memory, one that continues to raise questions about tradition, modern life, and the boundaries between personal conviction and public attention.